Welcome to America Uncanceled on CPAC Now. You know, no one wants to talk about death. It's inevitable, but we avoid the conversation. It's probably why many are reticent to discuss the very real possibility of a nuclear war with Russia that would leave millions dead and destroy the world as we know it. It's not a far-fetched scenario. Joe Biden is warning of Armageddon as Putin continues his nuclear saber rattling. A former State Department official warned today in War on the Rocks that we are indeed on a path to nuclear war. To assess this threat, determine how real it is, we go to someone we trust, someone who's a great friend, James Carafano, who's the Vice President for National Security and Foreign Policy at the Heritage Foundation. He joins us now. James, thanks for joining us again.
Yeah, it's good to be with you. You know, it's funny, on this issue, I am not a talking head. You know, I was in the Army for 25 years. In the Cold War, the U.S. Army had all the ground-launched nuclear weapons, all the tactical nuclear weapons in the Armed Forces inventory. So I spent most of my career building, assembling, guarding, moving, and training and planning for the employment of tactical nuclear weapons. So when people talk about this stuff, for them it's theory. For me, that was the day job.
James, break it down for us when you're hearing President Biden using the term Armageddon. Obviously, it raised such a red flag, I think, for all of us. Is that the case? Are we headed in that direction? Is Putin that madman that could possibly put us on the path to nuclear war?
Yeah, let me give you a two-part answer. Let me talk about the Biden comment, and then let me tell you what I think the real deal is. So for people who aren't following, so Biden made this comment that this is the biggest nuclear crisis since the Cuban Missile Crisis at a private fundraiser in New York City. And then he went on vacation to the beach in Delaware. So you have one of two choices either. Either this is the most incompetent president who's ever lived, who thinks that we're in the middle of the Cuban Missile Crisis and he takes the weekend off, or he was in a fundraiser and he wanted people to put an extra zero on the check. So he said, look at how big, bad, and important I am. I'm dealing with this major crisis. So I think we just put that aside. Here's, I think, what the ground truth. I'll give you the best case scenario and the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is Putin is bluffing. He is desperate to find success in this war. He wants everybody to quit and give him what he wants. If he's bluffing, the worst thing we could possibly do is give in to nuclear blackmail, because if we did that, then we would just really be opening the barn door there. I mean, not just from Russia, but China, North Korea, probably Iran at some point. That's a real nightmare scenario.
Let me just jump in real quick. I want to play this video. You mentioned about Joe Biden, where he's going off to Delaware on vacation, talks about Armageddon in the fundraiser. This is President Biden leaving the White House, doesn't even address the press, knowing that this comment would create such a firestorm. Let's take a listen and watch this video.
Mr. President, will you talk to us about Putin, sir? You think Armageddon is coming, sir?
So, as a reporter said, are we close to Armageddon?
Yeah, look, this is not a Republican comment. It's not a Democratic, a liberal, conservative. It's just an honest comment from somebody that's been following national security for decades. This is a part-time president. This is a guy who is not seriously fulfilling the responsibilities of the job. To talk about, to throw this out there and know that it's public and the world is listening to this, and then be refused to clarify what he meant and send a strong signal, it's not just incompetent, it's incomprehensible.
Well, to me, it's political too. I think he's trying to stir the waters as much as he can, which is why he's using these terrible terms like semi-fascist and other things, so that people can say, oh, we have to really focus on rallying around our president. And the real question, though, James, is I'm looking at this as a non-expert. You're looking at it as an expert. Is the Russian military this incompetent where they actually can't win on the ground? And so nuclear weapons are really their only viable option if they want to put an end to this conflict?
Yeah, that is a really perceptive question. The political point, though, should not be lost on your viewers, though. This is part of a package of things we've seen from this president. For example, just like the OPEC raises oil, and so he's attacking OPEC, it's like, and everybody in the world knows, dude, if you want more oil, just drill, baby, drill. So these are all things that they're just throwing out there to try to find some excuse to say, oh, well, we need Biden and his party, when the reality is they'll just make everything worse. So speaking of worse, you said, are the Russians really this incompetent that that's all they could do? So let me give you the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is the Russians detonate a nuclear weapon in Ukraine, trying to get the Ukrainians to quit or get the West to back off or whatever. In the end, that works out worse for Russia. Putin is worse off than when he started. And let me explain why. First of all, I was just in Ukraine. The Ukrainians aren't going to stop fighting because he drops a nuclear weapon. They're going to fight harder. And the West is actually going to give them more supplies, more arms. Matter of fact, they've already started doing that. And the thing is whether it's a tactical nuclear weapon or whether it's a hand grenade, the principle is the same. In the military, you do what's called fire and maneuver. You fire at something to suppress it or kill it or destroy it to allow a maneuver force to maneuver to an objective. Russia can't do that. I mean, first of all, a nuclear weapon is the most inefficient weapon to use on the battlefield. It's big, it's noisy, it knocks out airplanes, radios. Radiation's less of a big deal than people think, because honestly, in a tactical nuclear weapon, the blast and the fire and the explosion is going to kill everything that would die from radiation poisoning anyway. And what's left is kind of low-dose radiation. Nobody really knows what that means, or what long-term health effects that really has. But you have to maneuver around this and move around the explosion, and that's hard. The Russians don't have the armor. They don't have the air force to do that. These soldiers are not. These are conscripts. They're going into battle with tampons to pack their wounds. Right? They don't even have winter uniforms. Right. They don't know how to operate in an environment. My guess is if they detonate a nuclear weapon, half the Russian army would run away. So Putin cannot exploit this in a way. The Russians won't. I mean, the Ukrainians won't stop fighting. We won't stop supporting them, and the Russians would go from being sanctioned to being as isolated as North Korea. This is the nightmare scenario. So of all the things that Putin could do, and look, I'm not going to say he can't do it, because if Putin was smart, he wouldn't have started the war to begin with. So who knows what he's going to do? Yeah. But I can tell you right now, if there's a mushroom cloud, it'll be a bad day, and everybody in the world will be scared out of their pants. But the reality is it will be the sign of the next decline in Putin's hold on his own country, and certainly on his future in his war against Ukraine.
James, Bloomberg Politics reported Russia launched more than 30 missiles, 7 aviation strikes, and about 25 attacks from multiple rocket systems in Ukraine, signaling an escalation in the war as troops struggle on the ground. How does it end? You respond to this by saying Russia runs out of missiles. Do you think that's going to be the case scenario where Russia is just going to continue to get weakened as Ukraine builds a much stronger counteroffense?
Yeah, I said this wasn't an act of escalation. It was an act of desperation. What I meant by that, I just did the back of the envelope thing. That was about $1 billion worth of missiles.
Wow.
Wow.
And what did they kill? Sadly, they did kill some people, but they blew up office buildings and playgrounds. I mean, this is not going to advance them anywhere. And the thing is, that they think that's going to crack the Ukrainian will. It's not. And then what happened the day after they did this? Countries were lining up to give them air and missile defense missiles to the Ukrainians. And what's going to happen is, as the days goes on, Russia's inventory of these long-range missiles are going to decline. Ukraine's inventory of air defense and missile defense systems is going to go up, and they're going to be well protected from this, much the way Israel is kind of protected from the PLA rockets. And then what happens is, if you could protect your population, people are going to go back to the thing. They're going to go back to work. The economy's going to start to pick up. They're going to get more resilient. So it's what this reminds me of, and Mercy's not, but Matt's old enough to know this.
Yeah.
Mercy's way too young to know. There used to be a boxer named Muhammad Ali, right?
Of
and he
course.
had this big fight in I think the Philippines, the Thrilla in Manila.
The Thrilla in Manila.
George Foreman, right? And what happened was George Foreman just kept punching at Ali, and he just kept getting tireder and tireder and tireder, till at the end of the fight, Ali just kind of pushed him over.
Yeah.
This is what Putin is doing. He's exhausting himself, and the Ukrainians are actually getting stronger. This does not end well for Putin, and I don't think the resolve is going to break. And we have lots of debates among conservatives about what should we be doing. I do believe it's in our interest to support Ukraine. That stopping Putin is good for us.
Right.
It also blunts the Chinese. And I will say we can debate it, but the military aid, that is going directly to the Ukrainian military, and they are using that to effectively fight the Russians. And stopping the Russians in Europe is in the U.S. interest. So that part of the aid and that part of the American effort, I think, is well played.
We had this question about who should pay for it, right, James? Like, I think a lot of people in America view this once again as a European war, and they seem to always take a back seat to Joe Lunchbucket, who always has to step up and pay. But the question is, can the Ukrainians beat the Russians? At the beginning of this conflict, a lot of people were saying this is a waste of time. The Ukrainians are going to get smashed. Now it looks much less so. So the real question here is, I remember when we had CPAC Hungary, I talked to Prime Minister Orban and others about Europeans who are accused of being allies of Putin. It's actually not true, but they do buy a lot of energy from Putin, so they have to deal with the Russian government. They were trying to broker peace talks at the beginning of this conflict. Isn't this the right step for the Biden administration to basically quietly admit that they've bungled the diplomacy around Ukraine's defense, and we should try again to have a diplomatic cessation to this conflict?
Well, I think you raised a lot of really good points. The Ukraine is in a position of strength now. I think the Ukrainians could drive the way forward on that if the Russians are willing to come to the table. We've set the conditions for that. And you're absolutely right about our European friends. And in many ways, they were right. They were the ones that are trying to diversify their energy sources because they didn't want to be dependent on Russia either. And what this is actually has accelerated them. So, we were in a luckier position than we ought to be because the Ukrainians fought hard. The Biden guys were slow and late to this. Matter of fact, if we pushed the military aid faster and harder, we'd have probably ended the war sooner and got the Russians in a place where they would willing to call it a day sooner. But we're in a better place now, and now we really have to look at the way forward for Europe. You're absolutely right. The Europeans need to step up and do more. Ukrainians need to rebuild their country in a way that gets them past all the things that made them vulnerable. And they know this, the corruption, the inefficiencies that kept them from really evolving and growing as a country, that made them like a Poland, like a Hungary, like a Romania. They need to move in that direction. So we are primed to do this. Sadly, I still think we don't have a president that really up to this. He was dragged into this, like the interview we saw. They wanted to do nothing about Ukraine. They just wanted to sit back and watch Europe burn. And then when the Ukrainians fought, Biden did what Biden always does: is he's happy to write checks, that we pay for, but very little more. We don't get energy. We don't get real leadership. Look, today we just got the national security strategy of the Biden administration. Only 2.5 years, 2 years
Wow.
late. No. It's like we're halfway through the play and they hand you the script. I mean, come on. And when you read the thing, all it is a bunch of Biden blah blah, like telling everybody how wonderful they are. It's not even a strategy. And they say China's the most important thing, but they do what they always do. They just finger wave at China. And then everything in the damn reports about, DEI and ESG and climate change, it's just utter, complete, embarrassing nonsense. So the reason why I know there's a God, we should not be this far into this conflict and have Ukraine have a promise of the future with the wacko leadership that we have in Europe and the United States. But God has seen fit to give us a chance to protect our interests,
Right.
and do better. But then he's got a sense of humor because he put Joe Biden in charge of leading this, and that's just not.
Well, and obviously the bravery of the Ukrainian people keeping up the fight against Putin. I do want to ask you a question about the protests happening in Iran. Obviously, we saw the tragic death of Mahsa Amini, 22 years old, basically brutalized by the morality police. And this has sparked just so many protests and riots in Iran. Now, many of these protesters are being thrown into jail. What do you think the Biden administration should do to basically stop the Iranian regime?
Right. So Look at the numbers. This has gone on for 30 days. Over 400. They've killed over 400 people. There's over 20,000 people in prison. The rioting has hit 177 cities. So what have we learned from this? We learned that the Iranian people hate the Iranian regime,
right,
and they want it gone. That the Iranian regime that the Iran revolution is a complete failure, and the Iranian people are done with it. And the only reason why they're still in charge is they're the ones with all the guns. So this regime is going to fall. It'll fall the day that the soldiers stop shooting at the protesters and stand with them. I don't know when that day is. Nobody does. They don't even know when that day is. But I'll tell you one thing. The one thing the Biden administration has to stop doing is trying to support this Iranian regime. They still want to do an Iran deal that would net these guys over $1 trillion. And we all know that after the midterm elections, the Biden administration is planning on making another run at trying to get an Iran deal. And the Iranians would probably sign up for this point because they're desperate. This is exactly the wrong thing to do. If there was ever a time where we wanted Biden to do nothing and just go to the beach, this is it. Do not hand these Iranians another dollar, because you're just perpetuating the inevitable, which is you're just pushing off the day when this regime collapses from within. And us helping them just makes that day further. And why are we doing that? Why are we paying the regime to shoot and kill its own people? How embarrassing is that?
Yeah, it's a disgrace. Well, we want to thank you, James, for joining us, and thank you for your insight on these very important international issues that we're facing right now. And remember, we have expanded to the podcast world, and you can listen to America Uncanceled with Matt and Mercedes Schlapp wherever you get your podcast. We will see you next time. God bless.